I was a young woman living in the Midwest, and in those times, I was spending my summers working odd jobs to help pay for college. I would hitchhike occasionally, and it's not something that I did daily or anything like that, but from time to time, I would use it to get from one town to another. There was one night, though, that made me stop forever. I would say it was probably my 5th time or so hitchhiking. I needed to get to a town about 45 minutes away and didn't have a car. I couldn't figure out if a bus was going to come through anytime soon, so I decided to stand near the side of the road and wait for a car. Several passed me by until finally there was a car that I saw slow down and then stop next to me. It was a blue car, and the driver already had all his windows down. He leaned his head over to the side of the passenger's window and said hi to me. He didn't seem too friendly, but he asked me where I was going. I told the man, and then he told me to hop in and motion to the back seat. Based on the couple of words that we said to each other, the guy didn't seem very nice, but I had to make a split-second decision and elected to get inside the car. I got in the back and immediately noticed that the man had a type of barrier set up between the front and back seats of the car, so that when you were sitting in the back, you really couldn't see anything in the front. This made me regret my decision, but literally as soon as I was inside, the man began driving. I couldn't see him or anything, and now I had just hoped that he wasn't a total creep. His windows were all down in the car, and as we started driving at a decent speed, he rolled them up. When he did, I saw that they were all painted black, so I couldn't see out of them at all. Now I felt like I was in trouble. I tried to roll my window back down, but the button next to my seat didn't do anything. I called out to the man, telling him that I didn't want to ride anymore, but I didn't hear anything from him. I knocked on the barrier, which appeared to be very solid, and asked the man if he could hear me. I got no response, and the more we drove, the more worried I became. I was basically just sitting there in a box, not being able to see anything. I tried the door as well, but of course, it was locked. I didn't know what more I could do, other than just sit there and wonder where we were going. He drove for what felt like a really long time. I don't know exactly how long it actually was, but if I had to guess, it was probably about an hour. At last, I felt the car slowing down, and then finally come to a stop. I heard the doors all unlock, and then heard the driver's door open. The man started walking away, and I decided to open up my door and look outside. I slowly opened it up, and I saw outside that there was some sort of dirt road, but it appeared to almost be like a driveway of some sort. I looked around. It was very silent, other than the distant sound of crickets in the night. I wondered where I was and where the man had gone. I didn't hear any cars or see any lights to indicate buildings. As I looked outside further, there appeared to be just woods and a dirt pavement that we were on. I stepped outside the car to see a grass field with a little shed in the distance, but it didn't really seem like anybody would be inside there. Then I suddenly heard footsteps coming from another direction behind the car. I took off and ran into the woods. I didn't stop running and had so much adrenaline that I probably ran for 15 minutes straight in the woods. I was terrified, but after I got too tired to keep running, I slowed down and didn't hear any noises. I had no idea where I was or how to get to safety. I kept on walking through the woods in the same direction, and eventually, I made it to a road. This road was paved and not dirt. I figured I could follow it to get to some sort of town, or at least a gas station or something. The road was quiet, and I began walking on it for maybe 15 minutes before hearing a car in the distance. Then I saw the car start to come around the corner. I feared it was the same man and ran back into the woods until I noticed that it was actually a police car. I then ran out of the woods onto the street. The car saw me, and then I saw the flashing lights turn on. I ran to the officer who got out of the car and asked me what I was doing. I told him what had happened, and he was able to drive me to a nearby town. I stayed there for the night, and then decided to just wait for a bus and not hitchhike again.
Embark on a chilling journey like no other by subscribing to my channel. Join me as we explore the darkest depths of suspense, mystery, and thrills. Get ready for heart-pounding adventures, spine-tingling tales, and a constant adrenaline rush. Subscribe now and dare to delve into the unknown with us.
I come from a small village in Montana. My encounters with homeless individuals had mostly been limited to the glimpses I caught during my travels. However, during my sophomore year of college, a homeless traveler passed through our area. I would often spot him perched on a narrow strip of road near a traffic light, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps." On a few occasions, I took the opportunity to strike up a conversation with him, and he came across as a genuinely kind-hearted person. Before you jump to conclusions about my naivety, remember that I was young and raised in a close-knit community where everyone knew each other. Although our interactions were brief, I believed that we had established a friendly rapport. One day, as I waited at a traffic light, the homeless man approached my car. He tapped on my window, and I rolled it down. He seemed a bit more erratic than usual that day, but I didn't think much of it at the time. He told me he needed a ride to a nearby grocery store, and since I was headed in that direction, I invited him to hop into the back seat. About halfway to the store, the hitchhiker casually asked me to check my rearview mirror. I glanced up and was met with a chilling sight. The man had a small handgun concealed in the folds of his oversized coat sleeve. It was cleverly hidden, and I'm certain that passing cars wouldn't have noticed it unless they were scrutinizing closely. My heart raced, and I never would have anticipated that he could resort to something like this. "Hey," I said, doing my best to maintain a steady voice. "Let's not do anything rash." "Take the next turn," he commanded without any hesitation, "and no sudden movements." I was anxious when he directed me onto a secluded side road, but I followed his orders. What awaited me once we were alone? I was filled with terror. As soon as the main road was out of sight, he motioned for me to pull over and exit my vehicle. "Leave everything in the car," he ordered, "including your phone and wallet." I complied cautiously, making sure to move slowly and deliberately. After placing my belongings on the seat, I turned towards the man with my hands raised. "Good," he said, his voice cold and unfeeling. "Now step away from the vehicle." With the gun still trained on me, he climbed into the driver's seat of my car. There was a malevolent glint in his eyes, and for a brief moment I feared he might shoot me. However, he simply drove away. I managed to walk to a nearby gas station where I promptly alerted the authorities. My car was eventually discovered in a completely different state, utterly wrecked. The homeless man was never located. Since that day, I've grown less trusting of those around me. I wish I could summon the courage to assist hitchhikers, but I can't. The thought of someone resorting to such desperate measures terrifies me, and I've come to accept that you can never predict a person's actions when they're pushed to their limits. I was on my second week backpacking through Switzerland, and I reached a point where I was too exhausted to walk any longer. It was an unusually hot day, and I had blisters all over my feet. I was ready to call it quits. I was in the middle of nowhere and decided to take a lift to the nearest train station. But I was out of luck. I stood there for what felt like hours, and no car would pick me up. I don't blame them. I spent 2 weeks hiking in the mountains, my clothes were dirty, and I probably looked like a mess. When finally a truck pulled up, I didn't hesitate to hop inside because I was so thankful to be able to sit down and rest my feet for a while. I asked the driver if he could drop me at the nearest station so that I could catch a train to Zurich, but he told me that he was heading back there anyway, and that he could take me there as long as I didn't mind him making a stopover to load the truck. I didn't, and so we drove along. We made some small talk, and he seemed to be very polite. It was a pretty enjoyable ride until we reached the first stop. He loaded his truck while I walked around a bit and bought some water at a gas station nearby. He had offered me drinks a few times along the ride, but I always declined because I don't feel comfortable with that. I got back into the truck, and we continued the drive to Zurich. Almost immediately after we took off again, he told me that it wouldn't be a problem for him if I wanted to take off some clothes since it was such a hot day. I told him that I was fine, but he brought it up a couple more times. He also asked me if I wanted to take a nap in the back and that he had several hitchhikers sleeping there in the past. I declined again and started to feel a little uneasy around him and planned to leave the truck at the next gas stop. All of a sudden, he nearly yelled at me to put my head down and hide because he was driving past his stepbrother's car, and he didn't want him to see me in the truck. That struck me as odd, but I did it anyway because his yelling took me by surprise. That confirmed my resolution to get out of there as soon as possible, and I asked him to drop me off at the next stop and made up an excuse that it was my goal to enter Zurich by foot, and that I was well rested enough to make it, thanks to his lift. He agreed, and I got my stuff ready. He suddenly turned to me and said that I looked familiar and that he was sure he saw me somewhere before. I shrugged it off, but he insisted he remembered my face. He asked me if I ever went to a music festival because he was sure he saw me there sometime. That caught me off guard. and I told him that this was impossible because I'd never been to one. Well, do you want to? I'm going to one in Zurich. Let's go there together. I'm sure you'll like it. At this point, I really wanted to get off the truck as soon as possible and told him that I had no intention to come with him and asked him to drop me off now. He didn't answer, but reached into his pants and started behaving inappropriately while he drove along. I froze up, clutching my backpack on my lap and didn't know what to do. I kept thinking that I'd jump off as soon as he stopped somewhere and tried to ignore what he was doing since he didn't respond to my plea to let me out. A gas station was coming up, and he stopped what he was doing and asked if we should take a shower together. I figured that there would be people around and that it would make it easier to get rid of him, so I told him sure, why not? He pulled up, and as soon as he stopped, I yanked open the door and ran across the parking area of the gas station, hoping that he wouldn't come after me. He didn't, so I just kept running until the station was out of sight and I reached a busy street. Only after my heart stopped racing and I caught my breath did I realize that I left my shoes at the truck. I walked the last few kilometers barefoot and kept a lookout for the truck until I reached Zurich.